After e4, c6, knight c3, d5, and then knight f3. Pawn takes, knight takes back, and knight f6. We know we have to take the knight. So in previous videos, we went through what happens after pawn takes, the e-pawn takes the knight. There's going to be another video as well about the e-pawn taking the knight and the bishop reaching g4 coming soon. In this video, I'm going to go through g takes f6. Now white continues with d4. And after bishop to g4, which is the main move, we're also going to look at other moves like bishop to f5. All of this is possible. Also queen to c7 and rook to g8. But bishop g4 is the main move. White continues with bishop to e2, defending the knight, allowing the queen to keep defending d4. Otherwise, after a swap, then the pawn in d4 will be cannon loose and risks to be taken. Black can even think of taking the knight. It's one of the variations. Black gives up the bishop pair straight away, and considering that this bishop doesn't have great development skills, yeah, later he can play e6 and then develop, but h6 is not accessible. That means that we're just getting an edge early on. We will also anyway look at the variation where the bishop takes. So after a move like e6 now, white simply castles. So now black has to develop the pieces. After bishop to d6, the most played move in the position, and also like a very understandable way to develop the bishop. You know, bishop b4 will be attacked by a pawn, and that will also support the pawn chain. Bishop c5 is not possible. So after bishop to d6, white continues with the thematic c4, and we've seen this setup before. The idea potentially will be in the future to play c5 and stops the bishop from staying in d6 where he likes to be. And white has an idea of pushing the pawns to a4, b4. These moves eventually will find a way to let them happen. So after c4 and queen to c7 with an attack on the h2, let's try to familiarize with the setup. The bishop might think of taking the knight. In order to avoid pressure of the square h2, best move is h3, kicks the bishop away. At least we're asking a question. So after bishop to h5, this is the variation where the black player doesn't give up the bishop pair. There will be the one where the black gives up the bishop pair coming soon. So bishop h5, d5. The idea is that since the black king is in the center, we want to open the center by swapping pawns. Let's look now at a few ideas. If black plays bishop to g6, so basically does nothing about the d5 pawn, then white simply takes the pawn in e6. And after pawn takes back, knight d4, and the position is far superior for white. The knight is willing to go into the square e6 where he will dominate the board, and there's no coming back for black, because after king to d7 to protect the pawn, we have c5, and when the bishop moves away, we have a discover check, potentially winning the queen. Whereas if the king defends the pawn from f7, then again c5, attacking the bishop. Bishop takes, and then knight e6. We're attacking the queen and the bishop. Let's very quickly look at two ideas here. King takes the knight, ends really badly because of bishop c4. King moves back, rook check, king f8, and then bishop a6 check, and that's game over. In this position, after king f7, c5, bishop takes, knight takes e6. If black just plays another move like queen to e7 to defend the bishop as well and remove the queen from the attack, then bishop to c4. This is already a massive problem for black. The king can't really move away because then knight takes bishop again, and then we have rook, queen controlling open files, so that's going to be a disaster. If the bishop just goes away from the attack of the knight, then bishop h6 controlling key squares, whilst the bishop controls the other the light squares, then allowing the knight to move and give a check, and the king having less escape squares will end the game. And in this position, after knight d4, again, even if bishop goes to f7, which seems the better idea instead of misplacing the king, then again, knight takes pawn, bishop takes back, and now bishop h5 comes with a check, and we're opening the files as we wanted to. The king moving to the d5 will allow c5 to happen. The bishop protecting will allow rook to e1 check. And of course, moving on f8 will allow bishop to h6, which is deadly. And moving back to d8, we can just swap bishops after queen takes. then we're infiltrating with the queen and it's deadly again. So again, in this position, after the swap of d6 and then f takes e6, you can see how things are really tough for black. Even in the occasion that black plays e5, then white continues with c5, so a recurring pattern. The idea is, of course, to produce the passed pawn whilst attacking the queen, so black's best option is to take the pawn in c5, but it's already compromised because now knight e6 gives birth to a similar situation. Let's have a look at this other idea now. Queen going to b6. Earlier we went to something like queen to e7. Yeah, the king was in f7, but the moves are pretty much very similar. So after queen to b6, white continues with bishop to h6, cutting off this diagonal for the king. Now the king can't really go on the d file, and going to a light square will allow bishop to c4 move, which is deadly. So after knight to d7, well, the situation is already compromised because the black king can never castle, basically. We're cutting off f8 with the bishop, cutting off d8. So let's just go on a few moves just to quickly know how to wrap this up. Bishop to c4 now, finishing development. And you can see the many tactics that appear now. If bishop goes to f7, getting rid of the knight, maybe allowing black the very ambitious idea of long castling, which will be able to give black a normal endgame. White plays knight to g7 check, so that doesn't work. King going to f8 is a suicide because the queen will just take the knight and that's just going to be game over. King going to e7 is met by bishop takes f7, and then we're taking the knight, so we're winning a piece. And again, king going away will just allow the bishop to be lost anyway, so that's not possible. Let's look at this other idea that I've encountered personally. Bishop to d4 in this situation instead of bishop to f7. The idea is to remove the queen's power from the d file. Queen now plays to g4. The idea is to allow a rook to go into the d file instead of the queen, and potentially swap everything, especially since the black king will not be able to castle, and we're going to put the major pieces in the central files. So again, black can't castle, can't really move anything. Let's have a look at this move. Queen takes b2 now, for example, which potentially can allow the knight to move away, like to b6, maybe attacking the bishop. And yeah, well, the situation is compromised for black anyway, but after queen to b2, white now goes on by placing the rook on an open file in the d file. After black's best move, which is queen to b4, attacking the bishop, and bishop to b3, the idea is simply to do knight takes bishop, and then pawn takes back, and then rook takes back with an attack on the queen, and also a doubling the attack on the knight. So a move like a5, for example, to develop the rook in this very weird, unacceptable way cannot be tolerated. Bishop just going back, for example, doesn't help because the knight is able to go give a check, and then we have double attack on the knight. So let's make a recap. We're playing the 4 knights, and then pawn takes, knight f6, we have to take. In this video we're going through g takes f6, now the thematic d4, bishop g4, bishop e2 to protect the keeper, to allow the queen to keep protecting d4, and after e6, white castle. So very simple development of the bishop to d6, thematic c4. Queen to c7 is the main move in the position. White continues with h3, and then the bishop retreats d5. So now we've seen how terrible things go when black player allows white to do this exchange in e6, which removes a lot of important defense over the black king. So what happens when black plays a normal move like knight to d7? It seems like the most reasonable because it will allow the black player to do long castle later on. And so even with the swap now in e6, the black player will be in perfect time to play a normal endgame, basically. Well, again, the idea is the same, knight to d4. And now this discovers an attack on the bishop. So we have two pieces, we have a pawn and a piece attacking e6, so that means that if the bishop goes back to g6, then we have two pieces attacking e6, and then the knight in e6 will dominate the board. It's going to be a nightmare. So after the reasonable bishop takes bishop in e2, queen takes back. Two main ideas we're going to look at now. Well, again, there's way too much pressure on e6 now. So after pawn takes c takes d5, and c takes d5, we're holding a lot of pressure on e6, and after e5, which seems reasonable because yes, he produces a white passed pawn, but at the same time it looks like he's going to give black the possibility to castle. However, white plays knight to f5 now, and after finally long castling, white continues with bishop to e3, targeting a pawn. Development is amazing. We're threatening rook to c1, winning the game. Also because any minor piece will have to go on the way of the king and the white on the black queen, but then b4 will be taking the pinned piece. So rook a to c1 is the threat. After king to b8, which seems to be protecting the pawn and also allowing the black player to survive. White still plays rook a to c1, and it will win because of the knight being able to capture the bishop in d6. In this position, after queen takes bishop back in e2, earlier we went through c takes d5. Instead, what happens if the black player castles immediately? Well, again, thematic move bishop to e3 is excellently placed. And now, best move by black according to the engine will be rook h to e8, putting the rook on the same file of the opponent queen, maybe preparing an exchange. White continues with rook a to c1, placing the rook in its best square. After king to b8 and rook f to d1, this might look like a normal game with both kings are castled and everything can happen. Instead, it's a torture for black because there are no moves available. The idea of the white player here is simple. It's to take the pawn in c6, and after the pawn takes back, b4. The bishop will not be able to take the pawn in b4 because then it will be pinned by the rook. And of course b4 cannot be ignored because also there's a threat of c5. And yeah, the white player is just simply going to throw all of the pawns here on the queen side and then open the files. White has the attack, the possibility of an attack, whereas black doesn't. That's basically the difference between the two players in this moment. Black's best move now is bishop to e5, and white carries on with the plan. Pawn takes c6. Now let's just quickly look at two options. If bishop takes in d4, taking this incredibly annoying knight, then simply we can take the knight, and we're threatening to take the rook with a promotion, so we're winning material. Also, we have two pieces attacking the bishop in d4. So in this position, if black pawns takes back, white carries on with the plan, b4. The idea of swapping everything. Knight to b6, best move, is anyway met by queen to f3, doubling the attack on the square c6, forcing black to take the knight, and after bishop takes back, and e5, this is black playing literally computer moves in order to survive from this situation. White plays bishop to c5. And black's position is falling apart. He's got an isolated pawn, a doubled up pawn, whereas white's structure is superior, and white's activity also allows the white player to start picking up pawn as soon as he can. There's no escape now. Black's best move now is to take the pawn in d1, but white even can recapture with the rook and give up the pawn in c4 because of queen e2, which wins the game because the queen's attacking the knight, and wherever the knight goes, we can still play bishop to d6 and pin the queen to the king, so black is losing. In this position, we can see how after the swap of rooks, then the knight doesn't have a free pawn. A move like e4 is met by rook check, which allows the white queen to take a pawn, but if queen takes back, protecting the pawn in f6 and allowing the rook to keep protecting e4, white continues with queen to h5 and attacks both pawns, f7 and h7. It's going to win material. Queen d2, last attempt of surviving for black, or attacking, at least attacking the rook. White goes on with rook to d1, so there's nothing to worry there. When the queen moves away to c2, potentially in an attempt of a perpetual, rook to d6 is completely fine. Bringing the rook up. There is no perpetual for black after queen c1, king moves. And then queen f4 is simply met by g3, so there's no perpetual since the bishop is protecting f2. Let's do one more recap. So we're playing the two knights Caro-Kann. pawn takes, knight takes, and knight f6, we take it, and then g takes, we play the usual d4, bishop g4, bishop e2, e6, we castle, bishop d6, and we have this situation, c4, queen to c7, h3, we attack the bishop, and the bishop goes away, and now d5, strike in the center. We went through moves like bishop to g6 and also knight to d7 to allow black to castle as soon as possible. Let's look at this other idea. C takes d5. Looks very natural. Well, now we take the pawn back. And now, of course, the black player should not recapture because then this is the double isolated pawn. It looks terrible. Let's look at this other type of idea. Rook to g8. We haven't explored this type of move so far. White continues with normal development, bishop to e3. And after black plays queen to e7, providing with more defense the square e6, white plays queen to c2, attacking the square h7. And yes, that pawn is definitely not poisoned, should be taken. So if black plays any move like knight to d7 or anything else, that is simply taking the pawn with an attack on these two would be great. Bishop to g6 seems the most natural move to play in this position, of course. But now white continues with queen to c8 check, forcing black to play queen to d8, and now the queen can attack the rook from b7. Knight to d7 only move is met by pawn takes, attacking the knight, pawn takes again, and the game is over after rook f to d1. It's just too much pressure. Most active move by black is rook to b8, but it still doesn't work because of queen to c6, keeping the pin here, and also attacking the bishop a bit further. Bishop to e7, escaping for the moment, but bishop to c4. We're going to have too much attack over the knight in d7, and even rook to c8 here is not a problem. Queen goes to e6. So in this position, after bishop e3, earlier we went through a move like queen e7, offering more protection to the central pawns and also like kind of getting out of the way of rook c1 move. Let's go through another move now. Bishop takes knight, kind of removing the whole massive attack over e6 with knight to d4, and everything. Bishop takes back, and knight to d7, for example, is simply met by rook to c1. And the queen will have to move away, still protecting the bishop, though. Well, anyway, we're still going to play d takes e6. Black will not be able to castle anywhere, and this is just an extremely pleasant position to play in. White's evaluated engine plus 770 or something like that. And even if the black player hadn't developed the knight to d7, but rather to a6, then again, rook to c1. This is just, you know, one of the main reasons why I've chosen to make a video about bishop going to h5 instead of taking bishop in f3. It's just because it's a completely stupid thing to do. Give up the bishop pair, allow even more activity by white. Also, the setup of the Caro-Kann players who play g takes f6 is not supposed to be good. It's very popular. I've encountered it a lot, and you gotta know what to do in order to win. There's gonna be one more video about this opening coming soon. What happens after queen to e7, then queen a4 check, and if queen blocks, then we can just swap. Queen takes, king takes. Then we have pawn takes pawn with the check and the discover attack with basically on b7. So this wins. So in this position, after the check, if the king, well, the king goes to f8, we've got the bishop infiltrating. If the king goes to d8, again, pawn takes, and we're, you know, the files are all open. After pawn takes back, you know, we don't have bishop b7 right now, but we can still pin the bishop in d6 and finish development like that.